So I hope everyone enjoyed this training, and we will now begin the panel discussion. And before we do that, I will briefly introduce every panelist, and then they can all give their views on the movie and the themes discussed in it in brief. So, so our first panelist for today is Dr. Aruna Tummala. She's an adult and geriatric psychiatrist and the founder of Trinergy Center for Integrative Psychiatry in New Berlin, Wisconsin. Dr. Tummala is certified in integrative and holistic medicine and is pursuing further education in both functional medicine and Ayurveda. Dr. Pankaj Suneja is a psychologist with Blue Circle and practices in Shiv Nadar University as a resident counselor. He has more than 5 years of experience as as a psychological counselor in various educational communities. His therapeutic approach is relational and personal centered. Aparna Sanyal is a multiple award winning non-fiction director and producer based in New Delhi, India. Her films reflect her deep interest in human psychology, education, and ideas around resilience and finding meaning in life. She is also co founder of The Red Door, a mental health initiative which advocates for mental health and also works to organize a variety of workshops and programs regarding the same. Dr. Kimberly LaCroix is trained in psychoanalytic psychotherapy from Ambedkar University, Delhi. She has worked as a leader of the community health, mental health, and inclusion program and the deinstitutionalization project in Pune. She engages with the question of community mental health from an intersectional and social justice perspective. Her research is informed by both clinical practice and approaching mental health practices from a critical feminist and disability rights perspective. So, would the moderators like to give their views on what was discussed in the movie in brief?
Oh yeah, Dr. Aruna, could we start with you?
Good evening, everyone. Uh, Devanshu, I lost you for for a bit there. What was your question for the panel?
Oh, we just wanted to ask, what's your general opinion of the film now that you've seen it, and how do you personally connect to it as well, from your perspective and your experiences?
Yeah. In fact, I mean, I would say that my philosophy with regard to the practice of psychiatry, I started off as a very traditionally trained psychiatrist, but my philosophy is more in alignment with the message of this movie. So basically, what I mean to say by that is that it is from my experience, both clinical experience as well as um, the information that I've come to read of late, I definitely agree that there is an overprescription of psychiatric medications, especially here in the United States. And as I alluded to earlier when we were discussing, there is a rising trend of prescription of antidepressants and other psychiatric medications in developing countries like India. So that is something that is very, very concerning for me, because these medications, that they're based on the premise of chemical imbalance as the main underlying root cause for various mental illnesses. But even after 70 years of research, the chemical imbalance theory has not been proven for any psychiatric disease category. It's not been proven for anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, PTSD, none of them, even autism. And when you look at long term outcome studies, what we find is that there is a short term benefit, that too only in terms of symptom resolution. It doesn't do anything for the underlying root cause. But long term use of these medications alters our neurochemistry, not for the better, but for the worse. And I would highly encourage everyone here to read the book by Robert Whitaker. He's one of the people introduced in this movie. And his book is Anatomy of an Epidemic. That is a really, really wonderful book that is full of research about psychiatric medications. It is a very unbiased information about the state of psychiatry today. and it is very easy to read. Robert Whitaker has done a great job in explaining complicated research principles to all of us. So I mean, so that would be what I would say in terms of what I think about the movie. And even in my practice, I don't start anyone on psychiatric medications anymore when they come starting off with me, especially children and young adults or teenagers. But if they're already on a medication regimen, then we look at really probably for the first time, they're getting true informed consent from somebody like me. We talk about the long-term outcome studies and why it is necessary to heal the body first, and that's where functional medicine and Ayurveda comes. In functional medicine and Ayurveda, we recognize that the mind-body system is one unit, and mental illness is not just in the brain; it actually starts in the gut. Most diseases start in the gut almost a decade or so earlier before they manifest in the organ that we are finding to be abnormal. So, in case of psychiatric illnesses, the abnormality is manifested in the mind or in the brain, but the original seed of that disease actually begins in the gut 10 to 15 years, or even more than that, before the symptoms manifest in the brain. And we have to address all of these issues, heal the gut brain axis, look at multiple contributing factors to the presentation of the mental illness.
It's a lovely response. Thank you. Before we move on to the next panelist, Ms. Tuhina Ganguly, you've raised your hand. Is there something you'd like to say? I'm going to unmute you so you can speak your mind.
Yeah, hi, am I audible?
Yeah, perfectly audible.
Hi, so my name's Tuhina, and I'm in the Department of Sociology at Shiv Nadar University. Thank you so much for this wonderful screening. I've only just started my new research on certain mental health categories, so this was very, very productive to think along with. And I was reminded of this ethnography that I read on American psychology, which said that with this collusion of the pharmaceutical industry and the insurance companies, there's come about a greater divide between psychiatry and psychotherapy in the US. And is that something that is already happening in India, or you see that on the horizon? That's one. And two, I'm so sorry, I mean, this is again because I'm interested in this academically. This increasing emphasis on medicines, how does that affect the process of diagnosis? Has it led to new categories of mental illnesses that, I mean, the DSM is always trying to sort of come about these new categories. Is that also affected or influenced, do you think, by this growing medicalization? That's it. Thank you so much.
Do you want me to respond to that, Arvind? Or is there anybody else that would be more appropriate to respond to this?
If any of the other panelists feel like they have a response to that, that'd be great. But just a quick note, just keep the response as short and sweet as possible, because, yeah.
I mean, I actually graduated from NIMHANS, and then I lived and practiced in the US for many years now. So I would definitely say that there is a separation between psychology and psychotherapy. I mean, my original training, both in India as well as in US, it was definitely heavily psychotherapy based, that even the act of prescribing a medication has psychotherapeutic implications. But the way reimbursement happens from the insurance industry is very much based, for psychiatrists, is very much based on 15-minute med checks. That's the most common thing that many psychiatrists do. And so, yeah, I would say that that has definitely shaped how psychiatry is practiced in the US by many psychiatrists. But I mean, I can't obviously comment about the scenario in India. And what the second part of the question,
It was about the new sort of categories of mental illnesses.
Oh, yes,
Is
yes.
that affected or influenced by this?
I would I would say that there is evidence to that. A couple of examples that I would like to give is, when there was so much of angst about the 2016 election here in the US, with Trump coming to power, there was a lot of people on both sides were upset about that, and thinking a lot about the election results and everything. And DSM-5, the lobbyists at that time wanted to come up with a diagnosis called election addiction disorder, likening it to an obsessive compulsive disorder, and then making the pathway for medications that are used for OCD to be used here. So there is that clear connection between diagnosis is always linked to a particular psychopharmaceutical. But on the other hand, again, this is another book that I would recommend everyone, if you're able to access it, it'll be really useful. It's actually a book called Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, who is a foremost researcher in the field of trauma and mental health. And he came up with a diagnostic category called developmental trauma disorder, really bringing the focus on how early childhood trauma is responsible for a lot of syndromes that we call as depression, anxiety, borderline personality disorder, even psychosis, which I think really needs to happen. It's underlying different levels of trauma do result in a sense of self as adults that is not well formed and can manifest as many different psychiatric syndromes. But he proposed that category I would say maybe 10 years ago. But even today, that category has not been adopted, because the treatment that he proposes is really going back into nurturing, parenting, addressing the childhood trauma, which has nothing to do with medication usage. So I do see, this is maybe my bias, but I do see that there is that strong relationship between DSM and psychopharmaceutical industry. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for that answer. There are a couple of questions that have been asked, but we'll get to them as soon as we finish talking to the other panelists. Next, I'd like to reach out to Mrs. Aparna Sanyal. The same initial question. How do you feel about the film, and is there any sort of personal connect after watching it that you would like to share?
Sure. Thanks so much, Arvind and Devanshu, and the entire Medicating Normal team. I was deeply affected by the film because, I'm a filmmaker, and the reason I sort of got interested in mental health was because I was making a film about a decade ago, which looked at schizophrenia. And when I began the journey of the film, of making the film, I came from the regular sort of perspective, right? Which was that, it was a disease of the brain. Mental illness is just an illness. You just need to take your pills, and the usual sort of thing that is said is that, hey, you have diabetes and you need to take your pills. You have BP, you need to take your pills. Similarly, you have a mental illness, it's fine. You just take your pills and you'll be fine, And that was what I believed when I began making my film. Very quickly, I realized that the story that was the mainstream paradigm, there was something wrong with it. Things weren't really adding up. And that's how I began to sort of, look for more people, look for more stories which seemed more authentic, because every time when I met with doctors, they gave me a particular version, and that didn't match up to the stories I was listening to, And I was really, really lucky. And I feel like it was divine grace or something like that, because really, I hadn't known anyone in my personal life, but it was really divine grace, I feel, where I was led on this path where I met people, and today I am completely on the same page with what the film is saying, And in fact, the great sort of epiphany happened when I met Reshma Valyappan, who turned out, who eventually was the protagonist of the film, and she's here right now. She's attending, this conversation. And we actually went on. So Reshma had been given a diagnosis of schizophrenia, paranoid schizophrenia, when she was 22. And she was one of those who went off the medicines. And of course, everybody was like, how are you doing that? Why are you doing that? Even when the film came out, the film met with a lot of criticism, because it seemed like we were, peddling this idea that, it was okay to go off medicines. But, for us, for both of us, because I feel like we co-created the film, we were very clear that what we were saying was not coming from a one-off experience. There was enough evidence across the world which said that long-term outcomes were better when people were off medicines than when they were on medicines. And there was no refuting that, because these were scientific studies. It's just that nobody seemed to know about them. So when Resh went off her medicines, it seemed like it was some catastrophe that was going to sort of fall on her. She was very, very lucky, because again, she had a very good psychiatrist, so he was able to support her through that journey. And there's a beautiful point in the film where he says that with Resh, he actually began to question that entire medical model, the decision making tree, as it's called, and he began to question that because he clearly saw that what he had been taught wasn't working, and the things that she was doing were exactly the opposite of everything that was supposed to be done, and it was working. So that started our journey, and we actually set up something called the Red Door, which is a mental health initiative. And really the idea was to sort of say that, hey, maybe there are other options out there, and is there a way in which we can access them? Is there a way in which we can talk about it? Can we talk about these things in a safe way? And I remember that there was a lot of passive aggression that both Resh and I had to face from the medical community because of what the film said. So I'm just so happy, because 10 years ago when we made the film, we felt quite apprehensive about what we were saying, because it was so unusual. But right now, I feel so happy to see more and more psychiatrists like Dr. Aruna. I'm just thrilled to hear you talk, and we need more doctors like you, because a lot of times when you are in distress, you go to the doctor. That's what we're used to doing, right? That's what we're told we should do. And then if you don't go to the right docs, and if they're not able to take you through the right kind of journey, it can be devastating. It can completely ruin lives, and we see that happening all the time. And I work with a lot of people who've been given diagnoses and who've been on medicines for years, and it's really so. This film, it really spoke to me, and it made me very emotional in a few places, because I see this. I see this, people being on medicines for a long time, and trying very hard to get off them. And this is the constant thing, right? Like, enough doctors don't know how to taper these medicines off. So who do you even tell? Who do you go and ask? How do you get off medicines? It's really tough. They know how to put you on medicines, but they don't know how to take you off. So it becomes really difficult. So thank you so much for making this film.
Yeah, so
Okay.
yeah, Devanshu.
Okay. Thank you for your time, Mr. Pankaj. So next up, I'd like to invite Dr. Pankaj and Dr. Pankaj. And so there's been a question from one of Dr. Pankaj's patients with me, and he would like you to discuss certain uh, things that happened while he was under your treatment, as he feels that many of the things depicted in the movie resonated with him. So would you like to open with that?
Yeah, thanks, Sivanshu and Arvind. So, yeah, I think I wouldn't know how much to talk about. Maybe I think Ashwin, if he wants to come in and share his experience, what he found very relatable in this film. Like, I feel that a lot of clients that I've been working with have gone through this journey where there is a struggle to make sense of the experience. And I've also felt this in my own life when I was in my university. And it's like, that there's this first stop where we go towards, to take help is to go to a psychiatrist, because that's what easily accessible. I think it's as much relevant in India that, the person that is most accessible is a psychiatrist in terms of mental health, and also seems to have a stronger authority. So, so I think it becomes a challenge because when the person is going in, there's a lot of distress and a lot of pain, and one wants to get well, one wants to come off, with the suffering. It's too much, it's too overwhelming. And if at that time there is absence of a relationship or a person who just can sit with you and talk to you and listen to you kindly without trying to say, okay, you told me that, okay, that you're withdrawing, you're not able to sleep, you lack motivation, tick, okay, this seems like depression, and let's and then gives you a diagnosis. So I feel like this is a betrayal. This is like a sort of a very painful experience for the person who's going through distress. Of course, in short term, it feels like very therapeutically, healing, because all the pain is just blocked and it's numbed down, and person can go back to their functionality for a short while. But then I think long-term use, around 7-10 years or longer, I think it becomes very challenging. I mean, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm a therapist and a psychologist, but I've seen this very intimately, and I've seen that gradually, these feels like this medication, stop working, they reach a threshold, and then a person has to sort of increase their dose or change the medication, as it's seen in the Medicating normal, that how I think Dave's wife was wanting to come off, and she said she's reached her tolerance, and she was suggested that take Adenol, right, different kind of medicine. So it's difficult, and I think it's important to have this kind of dialogue. And in terms of, so as a therapist, I hardly refer someone to a psychiatrist, because I feel the dangers of it, because initially a lot of students and community wants to get off their meds so that they can go back to functionality, perform academically. But then can we have a spaces where we can sit with distress and suffering? And I think I would like to invite Ashwin to come and maybe talk if he wants to share his experience. And so I just briefly, like, I did work with Ashwin, and he's been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and he's been on meds for a while, and there's a lot of distress around it, and there's also a challenge to come off meds, but at the same time find who I am as a person, because the medications is allowing a person to just function, but there's a part of me which is sort of suppressed, part of the person which is sort of numbed down, and how can that be traced? So certainly there's a dissociation that comes off with this continuous use of medication. And so I mean I would just say this much, and if Ashwin wants to join in, and he can speak about his experience.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for sharing your experience with this. Next up, we would like to call on Dr. Kimberly LaCroix, and I have a question addressed to her. I would like to know, Dr. LaCroix, if you feel that the current, do you feel like contemporary psychiatry practices are sort of not taking into account a lot of things, let's just say, that may be experienced only by people suffering from disabilities, considering that is an area of interest of yours. So do you think modern day psychiatry has overlooked a lot of the mental struggles that people with disabilities go through?
Thanks, Devanshu. I think maybe I'll try to respond to this from a slightly different perspective by explaining what I mean when I refer to as disability. The term disability is coming from the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which actually doesn't look at impairment as the disability, but it looks at the systems that create barriers for the participation and the inclusion of the person, which produces experiences of disabilities. This is, in fact, like this convention, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities came out it was passed in 2006, 7, and a number of countries ratified the convention India has also ratified the convention. So when I say that I'm working with psychosocial disabilities, I am working with actually, it is an attempt to turn the table around, to not focus only on the biological correlates, which is basically also a critique of the chemical imbalance model of psychiatry, or the biomedical model, but to look at the social correlates, to look at the individual's interaction with their social systems. It could be the family, it could be the neighborhood, it could be their school systems, the multiple systems that they're engaging with, the government and how that plays a role, the access that they have to different systems. So that creating an experience of disability. So just to kind of take it away, also to connect to some of my other panelists on what they have shared, to look at this experience slightly differently, to look at mental health from a different framework. And that's how I engage with psychosocial disabilities. Can you repeat your question, Devanshu? I think you were referring to psychiatry as well.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I just wanted to know if you feel. I think I can. My question. I can still ask something. Thank you for clarifying first of all what the term disabled means. Ma'am, so do you feel like modern day psychiatry has just simply overlooked this aspect of mental illness? Because I don't see a lot of discussion or works being published in this regard.
I don't think I can speak on modern day psychiatry. I think Dr. Aruna may be more equipped to speak on psychiatry. I am a mental health practitioner working from a clinical psychology background. But I do think that, I don't think it is overlooking it. In fact, the global mental health movement is actually pretty strong. And within the last year, there is a lot of conversation around mental health, especially because of what COVID has produced, and the situation it has led to all of us. Like, we're all living in a certain kind of isolation. I think the discussion around mental health has increased exponentially. And earlier, what was moving at a really fast pace in terms of discussions around mental health and psychiatry, it's now taken a different turn, I think, in the last 1 year. I think I want to also comment on a question that was raised earlier about whether this is producing new diagnoses. And in fact, I recently, just a few weeks back, I came across an article that was speaking about work-related trauma. And in fact, they referred to it as work-related PTSD. And I was actually, I had an argument with somebody when I was wondering, why do we need to keep producing newer terminologies when we know that trauma is trauma? We know what it means. We know that we know what that can produce. And I get it that it's creating it is creating awareness about an experience that may not be spoken about, like work-related concerns or experiences that emerge from them are usually taken as normative. That's the way it is. You're supposed to toughen it up, or you're expected to deal with the power politics that exists over there, whether from a gender perspective or from a power perspective. So I understand the need to recognize this, but I do think there is something happening in terms of diagnostic categories, maybe in lay terms, not yet within the diagnostic system itself, but it is emerging as we speak. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you, Dr. Lacroix. Okay, so if Ashwin could come on and talk about his experiences with medication.
Yeah, I've given you permission to unmute.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me? Would you like me to turn on my video also?
That's fine.
Oh, okay.
It's fine.
It's fine. Okay. It's a long journey. I'm 52 years old now. Aparna, I lost my career in filmmaking to uh, poor psychiatrists, Aparna. I, I'm close to tears now, so it's better that the video is not on. Um, uh, I was a topper at FTI at a time when they were taking only 36 students out of 9,000 applicants, and I managed with the scholarship. I don't know, Aparna, if you remember the earliest avid media composer.
Sorry, who?
Avid media composer. Avid.
Of course, yeah, Avid, yeah.
So I was India's #1 software instructor. So
Wow.
not only I was the turn-to guy, like if you considered the top Photoshop expert of the country, I was the top video film editor support guy of the country, while I was also editing my own films. So I was burning the candle at both ends. My brain was like running at such a pace that I was burning out, you know. Now, and that would there would be those adrenaline cycles that would happen. So sure enough, the serotonin and the dopamine drop would happen, and then it would take me about 3 weeks to recover, and the producer wouldn't wait for 3 weeks, you know, for you to come back to finishing the remaining scenes. But the first two films I worked on were both nominated for national awards. One of them won it. Mitra, my friend, in 2001. We beat Lagan and Dil Chahta Hai to the national award. And that Chapa kind of ruined it for me in the Tamil film industry, because they said, okay, this is an RT bugger. Yeah, so the commercial guys wouldn't touch me with a barge pole. The RT guys said, oh, this is an English speaking convented guy. English बोलता है, साला हमसे बात ही नहीं करेगा. तो नेशनल अवार्ड भी आ गया, तो मैं बीच में चूतिया बन गया. Sorry for the language. So 1.5 years without work, I went into a depression. I couldn't function, so I went to a psychiatrist. He put me on Prozac. Prozac made me cyclical, you know. Dr. Aruna would know what I'm talking about. It, you know, it would fluctuate, and irritability, and there came a time when my wife said, listen, I just can't handle you. There was a resonance in the film when my wife told me, this is not the guy I married, man. Where's your guitar? Where you used to sing me a song every night before we went to sleep. What happened? You sing me a Telugu song today, sing me a Tamil song, sing me a Hindi song, sing me Dil Dhoondta Hai. You know, I couldn't. I didn't have conversation. I had a 3-year-old daughter, and when I would ask, tell her to do something, she would turn around and ask her mother, Yenamma, shall I do this? And I used to feel, you know, my daughter's questioning, you know. Earlier, she used to run to me. When she got hurt, she would run straight to me, because I come from a family of doctors. I knew, okay, this is serious, this is not so serious, you know. So she said, Appa, I've got a pain here. I know the answer. So my family had this joke that Ashwin, I don't know is not a answer that I expect from you. So I was this guy with all the answers, and suddenly I I didn't have the words, I didn't have the vocabulary. I run out of English, which is my strongest. It was failing me.
Yes.
I couldn't find the words. I was just sitting silent in one corner. So then at night, I used to lock myself in the bathroom, dip myself in a bucket of cold water just to get that anxiety down. And then I would sit on the floor and bawl my head off. And I would cry and cry and cry. And my wife would hear me bawling through the door and say, Ashwin, open the door. And she'd bang on the door. And I would open it and say, I don't want you guys to see me like this, And it was the meds that were doing it. It was, you name it, clonazepam. I have a whole list. If I could show you even now, there is a whole Cadbury Celebration dry fruits, tin, which is still got my old meds because I'm so insecure that I might need them again. Some of them are expired, but I know expiration dates are a big scam in the pharmaceutical industry. I know it may even work halfway through. I've still got Librium, about 40 tablets. I've got God only knows what all sitting inside this box. Mitral, name it. I have Xanax, not Xanax, but it's equivalent. But it's all there, and I know what it does, and it's just there. And when I decided I need to go off the meds, because I was still facing anxiety. Day before yesterday, I woke up at 6 in the morning with an overwhelming fear. I got out of bed at 1:30. My wife came and said, I said, listen, I told her, listen, I'm just going through that thing again. It's a 3-day PMS, just let me be. Today is a lot better. But now I've got reconciled to those cycles and I'm handling it better. I went through a long session with Pankaj last year when I was going through, when we first went into lockdown. Suddenly I had to reinvent my entire teaching. See, the thing is, I'm a creative artist. And suddenly you put me in a university because, well, I know filmmaking, I know editing, and I know I can teach. I'm a good communicator. I know I could do this. But then I'm in the middle of a bunch of people who are PhDs, who speak in a way where they, especially sociologists and others. Hi, Tuhina. Who speak, who use 5 different words for the word shovel. Whereas I kind of try and like to simplify things. And suddenly there was this, where am I? What am I doing? And the students vibrate well with me. The vibe was good. But I don't have a PhD. What am I doing here? And suddenly, when we came on to the online method, this was my forte. Video, being able to communicate well with video, being able to make the transformation to video, to the online method, wasn't easy, but I did it very quickly. I also helped a lot of my fellow colleagues and faculty manage the transition. But by June, I was a wreck. I was a complete mental and physical wreck. That's when I reached out to Pankaj. I said, listen, man, I'm on valproate. I don't want to go on to, I weaned off everything else. I did taper down gradually because I went off clonazepam and that was a nightmare. But I weaned off everything except valproate, and I reached out to Pankaj and I said, listen, Pankaj, meds are not the answer, man. I don't know, yoga, meditation, water therapy, stand on my head, help me, dude. Whatever. Then I've sorted out my diet to a large extent. I realized that yes, I'm the guy. I'm a Tambram. Grew up on pakka hardcore vegetarian, lots of fiber kind of food, but then I like my non-veg too. But I realize no man. I keep my non-veg to the minimum and make sure I get enough dahi and charge into me, because I used to have stomach disorders, and I used to keep popping Norflox, thinking it was gastritis. Um, then it was psychosomatic, I think, IBS. I went back to, I starved for 3 days, cleaned out my bowels completely. I didn't do an enema, I just took a laxative. But then I started back on dahi-based diet and slowly went back to probiotic, and I'm feeling a lot better. What's helping is pranayam and basic yoga stretchings, and trying to keep off meds as much as possible. But there are days when your fingers tremble, you can't write, your handwriting shake. I used to have a very good handwriting, and today my E looks like a W, and on days that are really bad, you can barely write. Your hands really shake. So the anxiety is still there. I'm still trying to work my way around it, but like the others in the film said, it's after 20 years of psychotropic abuse, shall we say. uh, it's going to take a while. It's going to take a while. I don't know when the half-life of each drug. I don't know how long it's going to take to get out of my system, but I'm trying. I summed it up. I've spoken a great deal. I just wanted to get it off my chest a little bit. I'd be happy to answer questions if somebody has any. But it's very hard. Every day is very hard. Now the semester is starting again. The anxiety is starting again. I'm going to have to break down every day into little tasks, make a little checkbox, and tick off each task and feel good about it.
That was a really heart-wrenching but really beautiful story, Mr. Ramanathan.
Yeah, but I lost a career, man. I lost 2 careers. Now I'm my third.
Yeah, it's incredible, just like what things in the wrong, when things are in the wrong hands, what can happen. But yeah, but your story is really, the story of perseverance is something that really sticks out to a lot of us.
No, a lot of it is to do with also, like Brianna was saying, no, I have a wife who, she said, you go my way, I'll go mine, at one point. And then she saw the pain I was going through. And she took me to NIMHANS. And they managed to put a label on it and say bipolar disorder type 2. I didn't buy it. I said, yeah, it's okay. It's I'm not coping. Yeah, but don't put a strict label on it. Don't put me into a compartment. Just help me cope. Talk to me. Let me work my way through help me work my way through my anxieties. I'll manage, and as long as you always have something going for you, in terms of, if every day you can get about half an hour, 45 minutes of creative good output, that's good. Yeah, that's more than a lot of people can do. That's fine.
Yeah. Uh, Thank you so much for your for sharing, sir. Would any of the panelists like to comment?
I'd love to respond if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Just keep it short and sweet. We have some other questions piling up.
Just very quickly, Ashwin, I hear you. Everything that you're saying, I mean, I'm just so sad that this seems to be such a common story. And I hear of so many people, brilliant, talented, creative people losing their lives because of this. It's always a little thing that begins, and invariably it's because of high stress situations, where, you feel a lot of anxiety, you feel like things are going out of control. And, what you said about racing thoughts, I mean, I hear it all the time, but maybe at that point you just need to take some time off. Maybe it's too much that you've put on your own plate and you need to just deal with that. But nobody seems to say that to us. When you go looking for help, unfortunately nobody seems to be saying that to us. And I just wish that things could have turned out differently. However, I also feel that if you've really been taken through this journey, perhaps there's a reason. And maybe the reason is that you are sharing this with us, and maybe you can help others not make the same mistakes. So I feel like there's always something to look forward to. There's always hope. And I constantly, I mean, that's the only solace one can give oneself, right? That if we've been through certain experiences, maybe we can help others. And maybe, and you're in the perfect place to do that. I'm sure you have a great equation with your students, so maybe you can help many of your students. So yeah, so maybe not all is lost. That's all I'd like to say. Thank you.
Yeah, Parna, I've signed up for Blue Circle has this thing where you can sign up as a volunteer to help out students who might be facing these issues. I just say if you live in your memories, then you're a recipe for depression. If you live in the future, it's like a recipe for anxiety. Stick to the moment. What can you do right now?
Yes. Mindfulness.
That's it. Mindfulness, exactly. Thanks, Aparna. Aparna, by the way, I'd still like to work when I can. So if you, whenever you're making a film, please keep me in mind. I'm not dead yet.
Thank you. All right, done.
Yeah. Conferences connecting people, you love to see it. The next, we're going to jump straight to the Q&A box. And we'll start from the top. So the first question that I see here, this is open to anyone on the panel, just unmute and go ahead. But the question is, do you think the way the world is set up, in brackets, constant competition, multiple engineered crises, expectations due to living in a capitalistic society, etc., are impacting mental health across the world? And if yes, how can this be countered at a societal and global level? Just a reminder to the audience, we will not be answering every question, but we will try to answer as many as possible. So yeah, whoever feels strong enough about this, go ahead.
I would like to take a stab at it. In fact, I agree with that question. Yes, I think there is the way the world is set up today. We are so extraction minded. That comes from the capitalism, extraction of resources from Mother Earth, extraction of human resources as well. I mean, human beings, we are not a resource. We are a human being, but we are seen as a resource to be extracted out of. So that is definitely contributing to the high stress all over the world. But in terms of countering it, I really think that we shouldn't be thinking about global interventions. We should be looking at decentralized local interventions. And what do I mean by that? Is that, every tradition and cultural tradition in the world has had an understanding about health, including mental health. We need to really tap into that and not simply buy in to the Western medicine based paradigms, which really depend on a single pill intervention. They ignore the multiple determinants of chronic disease. They are very much into randomized controlled trials, which, you cannot do a randomized controlled trial to a lifestyle intervention. And so these studies never even get even looked at. But really, I mean, somebody earlier was talking about how medications are presented. Hey, if you have diabetes, you take a medication. Is the same thing for depression. Actually, I would argue that even for diabetes, taking those medications is not the right way to go about it. It really is about getting to the root cause, which is, why is this person developing insulin imbalance at this time in their life? That's the question. The why is very important. It's not, and for this to happen, there's enough information in all traditions across the world. We just need to tap into it. We need to go back into our own intuition, listen to ourselves, and even, thank you, Mr. Ramanathan, for sharing your story. What you were saying, the way you addressed your own irritable bowel syndrome. If you were to go to a doctor for that, you would be put on, if you were having diarrhea, they would give you an antidiarrheal medication. If you're constipated, they'll give you a laxative. But the way you realized from your own thing that you needed to fast at that point in time, which is, one of the first things that we might even recommend from an Ayurvedic lens as well. So we all possess that inner wisdom, inner knowledge. And if enough of us get together, go back to our roots, I think we should be, so that would be my response. It's not, again, not in terms of things, because everyone is different. Every culture is different. Even our diets are very different. I mean, what the Alaska Inuit tribe, they eat all meat, they eat all seafood. But, from in India, we have such a varied diet, vegetarian, meat-based, and, all so many different diets. Our diets actually evolved according to our environment. And now that doesn't happen anywhere. We are trying to, you hear that Japanese are doing well on a seafood diet. We try to incorporate that, but that may not be. Even between North India and South India, chapatis were recommended for South Indians, but we are mostly a rice eating population. And so there's a thinking that is not, even that is not appropriate. So going local, going sustainable, going back to our roots is what I would recommend to that. Thank you.
Thank you for that answer. Would anyone else like to say something? Yeah, Dr. Lakra.
I would actually like to also comment. I also agree that I think the way to address it is to actually understand the way the distress is understood locally also, and what expression, the forms of expression, the community project that I worked in, and people speak of ants on their body, or they speak of pins, like a sensation of feeling pins. That is not easily translatable to anxiety in the classical DSM version of it. But when it reaches psychiatry, or when it reaches psychiatrists, it directly gets translated into a disorder. And I think we need to understand the forms of expression that is local to a particular group, which is also actually structured by the system, the society surrounding this particular group. That is also to say that one needs to recognize the social systems in place over there. So one needs to, as a practitioner, recognize what globalization is doing, to be able to understand this difference as well. One needs to understand how gender is operating in this person's life. One needs to understand how the pressures to be a particular kind of, adolescent also puts pressure onto a young person to maybe be extremely productive, extremely functional, and all throughout their lives, as if moments of non-productivity is not what should be happening. So I think to understand, we need to understand and recognize these structural aspects that impact or produce our experiences as well of distress. And to address it also, I think I agree completely that there are multiple systems already in place. They just don't get enough of coverage because they're seen as alternatives. They're not seen as the main systems of care. In fact, the project that we work with, we actually look at the holistic perspective of the individual. So we do look at homeopathy and we look at Unani and existing forms of care and try to see if there are ways to actually address the sign or the symptom, whatever is emerging as the symptom when we meet the person, and see if there are other ways. In fact, even talking. Sometimes a lot of people come in and they don't have the language to talk to their families. The family systems approach has actually demonstrated a lot of like a complete shift, like locating the problem in communication, in the way families communicate, in what they communicate through like simple day-to-day life events and communication. So I think I agree that we need to look at more local solutions, but we need to recognize what's happening globally, because I do think the global is also moving with globalization. Like commercialism is what we are becoming as a society, and it is shaping the way we are thinking about ourselves as individuals as well. So yeah.
Thank you. That's a lovely answer. Before we go to the next question, Ms. Reshma Valiappan has her hand raised. So, Reshma, I'm just gonna unmute you for a second. Yeah, you're free to talk or ask whatever question you had.
I just wanted to add that, we are looking at a movie that is written from a Western narrative, and we're also looking at recovery systems from a Western narrative. Therefore, we're also looking at the future from a Western narrative. And I think, it takes on to what Dr. Aruna also has mentioned. We need to really go back. I mean, I would say completely, even sometimes remove the entire narrative, because when you remove that narrative, you remove your recovery approach. When we look at what holistic can then mean, even if we're talking about psychosocial disability, we're looking at how disability justice was shaped from the First Nation point of view, which is a political point of view, and to relook how it is from an Indian perspective or an Asian perspective. And then again, you're breaking it down, right, to city perspective where diet is based. Now, I'm not going to go into the entire gamut of it as far as experience can tell me. Although Aparna mentioned this, paranoid schizophrenia, I come with a range of different disorders that have been given to me and has been worked on, and I currently live with a brain tumor that has caused epilepsy. Now, the same medications are being given to somebody like me, and it is given to somebody with a mood disorder. And you can imagine the extent to how that is shaping everything else. So now I'm developing symptoms that I've never had with schizophrenia, right? And I learn about other people who are developing symptoms such as epilepsy while they're on the same medications. And what I really want to also address here is one of the questions that was asked when we are going into a global based movement. I think what the pandemic has really made few of us aware of is, where do we all fit into this? I think it's human connection. What are we looking for at the end of the day? Whether you're on meds, whether you're ill, whether you have diabetes or heart conditions, where is it coming from? What's the cause? I mean, it's an endless journey, if you ask me. When people ask me to talk about my story, I've been talking about it since 2004, and it's disturbing just to even talk about it, because it's really exhausting. It's a really long time, right? But where we at is my question that I think people in the audience should also ask themselves. Where are we really at, and where are we going? Because we're still stuck in the same space. I always ask myself, where are the rest of the schizophrenics? Why am I the same person that you have to call? Where are the other people? And if you look at it, it's maybe stigma. Maybe it comes down to that, because if they're allowed to come on camera, if they're allowed to speak and to talk about the things that have really disturbed and distressed them, perhaps we don't have to also approach a psychiatrist or a doctor at the end of the day. We approach each other, right? And I think that's where social structures, or I think the word was used, parenting, reparenting ourselves through our friends or our family members. Do we have it inside of us? Do we have that kind of a system? Do we have peer support circles? Do we just have this? And can we bring that into the system that allows even outside of gender binaries? It doesn't matter, man, woman, or third gender, whatever gender you identify to, does that exist? Our support systems right now completely suck. Now, I can tell you I wanted to look for a rehab center for myself, pretty much very recently. And it turns out I can stay in a hotel. That is a lot more cheaper than the rehab center. So where does that leave me? Because the rehab center is more interested in my schizophrenia than me telling him, I have a brain-related condition and I need space to deal with my sleep disorders caused by my brain tumor. Are you not listening to what I'm saying? So mental health cannot be looked without physical health. We can't move away from just health as itself, and how health in our current situation is also shaped on, right? We're moving into a more global look at it. And I must support Dr. Aruna on this, because I do believe in how alternatives that have existed in almost every single culture. And I've met individuals from South Africa who have resorted to her tradition and her roots, and she speaks the same thing. Whatever condition she has, she's not going to look at what a Japanese is doing, because that's not where she comes from. And she has to consult with where she comes from. And I think that's the bottom line. Where you come from shapes who you become, and all the conditions that arise with you. You can call it many names, you can talk about in terms of shamanism, in terms of esoteric practices, mysticism, tantra, desire, all of that, and who we are with and where we're going to. It's all actually a circle. And I think that's where we need to really, I don't know, break or tear away everything. I wish we can do that. I wish we can just take it all down, tear it all away, burn those books aside. Please don't do that. It's just a metaphorical, way of me talking. But that's really the exhaustion, I would say, as somebody who's been an advocate and an activist. It's like it's burnt me out entirely to even talk. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. That was, it also raises that, that important question about visibility as well, because, there are always these token people who come from certain minority groups, whether it's, related to caste or gender or whatever, including mental disability as well. So it really asks the question, where is everyone else? Why aren't they being given the choice to speak? So yeah, thank you for sharing. That was a really lovely story. Next we have
Yeah.
yeah.
Arvind, I'll take it from you. So, one very interesting question here is from an anonymous attendee, and the question is: how can mental health counseling, talk therapy, be made available to those who can't afford it, to those who say don't speak English, to people who have never interacted with the discourse around it, never heard mention of mental health? Oh, it seems Dr. Suneja is answering that question already. But if any other of the panelists would like to speak on it, we'd be delighted to hear your thoughts on this question.
I mean, I can talk about something that we do at the Red Door. Nobody at the Red Door has a medical degree. We're not psychologists, we're not counselors. We're just people who are open to listening. And I think I think Resh just spoke about the human connection, and I think that really is what it boils down to. A lot of times what we're going through in life is what makes us human. And what we're most craving is that human connection and just to be understood. And you don't always have to pay to go talk to someone to be understood. Can we create a little tribe of people around us? I think if we are taught as children to just invest in the right relationships, invest in the right friends, so that and if we can tell people around us that there will be times when each one of us will be going through a difficult time, we will feel down and out, we will feel overwhelmed, we'll feel grief, loss, all of these things will affect us, and it's absolutely normal for those things to affect us, because that is what it means to be human. When Gautam Buddha came out of his palace and he saw these three people, one who was dying, one who was old, one who was sick, it affected him so much he left his palace. And he went off on a journey of self-exploration, right? So people have been affected by these things all along. That is what it means to be human. It is normal to be affected by these things. It's normal to feel pressured. So I mean, when that question was asked of, about whether, this entire stress and pressure on us to be productive, it is so true, because if you don't get your salary at the end of the month, you can't make your rent or pay your EMIs, or pay people, pay for your food, etc. So there's a lot of pressure on us constantly, right? And we are responding to that. So the first thing is there a way in which we can create communities where we can listen to each other to begin with? Because most things can be sorted out with just that. In that film, when the girl says that, I was just a scared girl of 24. I was a 24-year-old who was scared. Could somebody just have listened to me and said that, what, it's not your fault. Don't feel guilty for what happened. That's really all that was required. And there's somebody else in the film who says that, earlier when it happened, what would people do? They would go to their pastors, they would go to their family members, their community, and talk about it. And the community would take care of it. And there's this beautiful story. I mean, maybe it's just apocryphal, but they say that in Africa, there's a particular tribe where, if somebody is depressed, they don't ask what's wrong with you. They sit around the person and say, hey, what did we do wrong? What do we need to change? Tell us. And I think that is exactly the kind of space that we need to create for each other and for ourselves. By creating that space for others, we are creating it for ourselves as well. And I think the conversation needs to move to that now.
I would like to respond to that as well. I think, in fact, the way post-independence, the way the medical system was actually set up in India, I forget the exact terms, but we do have district health programs and district mental health programs, and it really becomes very localized. In fact, involving the village panchayat. So that system of governance was also, where the village panchayat is actually responsible for local governance. That same system was also applied to delivery of health services. That's why we have the local health systems, and even for mental health too. Actually, in fact, my hometown, Ballari, which is in Karnataka, was actually one of the index program for seeing how this district mental health program can be implemented. Although it came from a Western perspective of medications and things like that, but that really made it accessible for people in that region to access care when they needed to. So I think, we can still stick to that same kind of, I'm echoing what Aparna said, that we have to go back into our community. We have to create these safe spaces for ourselves and for others. In that, and I think I'm once again repeating the same point of localization and decentralization. That is very, very important. And we don't have to find an English speaking therapist. I mean, one of the things I miss working in the US, and I absolutely love when I get Indian patients here, is my ability to actually do psychotherapy in the local language. I always tell sometimes I'm translating our, muhavras and, samata in Telugu. I translate that to English and it loses its impact because there's no good translation. We have so much of wisdom in our language, in different local languages. That's what I used to do when I worked in NIMHANS as a resident and a senior resident. And at that point in time, I really enjoyed using, I used to speak quite a few languages back then. And so I used to use different sayings from the local language to hone that point in. So you don't really have to be English speaking to do that. And even in psychotherapy as well, there is the Freudian psychotherapy, which is very psychosexual development based. But then we have Jungian psychoanalysis, which is more Eastern philosophy based. So we can, even there you see that there is a dichotomy there. We really have to, when this information is presented to us, we always have to apply it to us, the parakna, that evaluation as to whether it is applicable to us should always be there. And the other thing that, I think Reshma alluded to this. In fact, in Ayurveda, the first step for disease formation, it's called pragya aprada, which means loosely translates into mistake of the intellect. And the mistake that our intellect is making is that we are unworthy or unlovable, that we have lost our connection to the Paramatma, that we are separate from everybody else. That disconnection from Paramatma, as well as disconnection with other souls and nature, is what gives rise to that sense of low self-worth. And it does talk about that it is society and family that does that to the developing soul. So really, from there, everything else that leads to misuse of the senses, meaning overeating, overindulging in visual media, things like that are not helpful for us. And we see all of this happening, and gradually that then begins to affect the gut and other kinds of energies in the body. And that's how all disease, whether it is diabetes or depression, it starts with lack of self-worth and disconnection from our own soul, disconnection from other souls, and disconnection from the universal soul. So if you keep these things in mind and go back to, and that's where yoga, meditation, all of this comes into play, and why we see, in here, every nook and corner here in the US, you'll find a yoga studio or a meditation studio. Why that is happening is because the globalization, the capitalism is really sucking the soul out of us, and people are realizing that that is not the way to go. And there are, again, many books that have been written on this. From a book that I would recommend is Thrive by Ariana Huffington. She's the owner of Huffington Post. She talks about going back to, giving up that capitalistic ideals and going back to taking care of our health, mental wellness, as being very, very necessary on Wall Street. So all is not lost. And I would also sorry for taking so much time, but I felt that I needed to address this as well. There were a lot of questions about, what can people do when they're on these medications, and, what is the outcome for that? I would say that, really there is recovery. Recovery is possible. Coming off of these medications really needs to first focus on balancing the gut-brain axis through diet. And I recommend Ayurvedic supplements and even some nutritional supplements. Very, very simple things. But once we get our body in balance and then attempt a very slow taper, we can definitely overcome drug withdrawal syndromes. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Tummala, for your answer. This is another very interesting question here from an anonymous attendee, and here's what they asked: how do I deal with feeling like an outsider? I come from Kenya and found hard to socialize with anyone. They mostly talk to me because of my origin and then ignore. I feel like a goblin, and I've developed social anxiety that I'm afraid to talk to people. I can't seem to connect with anyone, and it's taking a toll on my mental health. Would any of the panelists like to answer that?
Maybe I can chip into this. Yeah, I think there as a community, I think when we live, there's something normal, and then there's something which is called mainstream, right? And then this has been regarded like that, and then suddenly some section of people come into the means the alternative or the marginal spaces, and they're often put it outside and not accepted in the sort of a culture or in that sense of community. I think it's very hard because then there's no sense of belonging, and there's no sense of connection to where the person is. And I think if there is a possibility of having a certain kind of connection with someone in the community who's also perhaps like like an outsider. For example, like when Reshma is talking about, that why there are only like few schizophrenic, not everyone, and that's a challenge. And for to find that certain kind of connection with someone who's also might be going through certain kind of experience and voice out, and so that the coming together of outsiders can change the way the communities looked around. Like they're not just outsiders, they're just part of the narrative, they're part of the community. And so I think now just thinking it at an ideological level, certainly, but at the same time thinking of how it could translate into practical sense. Like I wonder if there is a space like like a mental health space around like a therapist around, or someone to go to, like talk to about the distress of being isolated, of being alienated in this community where you're not accepted as a person from a different culture, different ethnic group. And maybe just speaking up, having a voice around it empowers to feel a sense of misfit where you are. And then I think this just goes on, like how much the voice has been sort of heard and accepted, the voice is extended to the wave in the community which is against you, right? And then you engage with that wave, and it's sort of like an oppression, and you're constantly humiliated, and you're addressing that humiliation through by speaking through your voice, and not just letting the resistance go into you. So I think that's how I see it. Possibly when this could be addressed, and there is this total upside down overview that we need to probably see, like when we talk about looking at mental illness or issues in terms of just hormonal, bodily, but they're coming from a certain sense of connection with the deeper source, like Dr. Aruna was talking about. So yeah, I think I'll just stop here, and maybe if anyone wants to add on to this.
Thank you for your input, sir. Dr. LaCroix, would you like to add something? Would you like to add something to this, since it seems to be up your alley?
Yeah, I think what I would add is connecting to what was also mentioned earlier. There are exercises for the gut that will help you relax. I think when you are experiencing burnout, you also need to relax and find ways to do that. And I know self-care is, I read your comment, and I think self-care is sometimes overused in a way that doesn't help us connect to what would be best for us. I think small activities that you could do in the day that will help, that works for you. I think everybody has their own ways, and they know what works for them as well. So something that works for you is something I would think about. Again, I don't know actually your I don't know what you're experiencing fully, except for the term burnout. But I would also say some more exercises, breathing exercises as well, have worked quite well to kind of help you relax and take some time out as well. That's what I can think of at this moment. But of course, I would know more if I meet you.
All right, thank you for that answer. There's a very interesting question which was sent earlier, which actually ties into a question that I've had for myself. Somebody asked, how can doctors be held accountable in a system deliberately designed to protect everyone along the way, such as pharma companies, researchers, etc.? So along that same vein, I had my own question. Is the tendency of a lot of medical practitioners to immediately move towards medication, is it a sign of the pharma industry being overzealous in what they sell? As in saying that all of these are sort of, I think a term used in the documentary was magic bullets, right? So a lot of pharma companies say that what they sell will solve your issue. Or is this an issue of doctors being a bit lax in a sense in the way that they see drugs and sort of move towards that kind of immediate desire to to solve diagnosed problems with medication? So yeah, anybody can speak out.
I can take that if nobody. Oh no, Dr. Aruna, why don't you go ahead? Well, I mean, it actually, is something that Dr. Aruna sort of mentioned as well, which was that, I mean, when we say diabetes, right, and we say that, okay, take a pill and everything will get well. I think there's basically a problem with the way in which Western medicine organizes itself. I think it's very good with emergency medicine. You've met with an accident, your life has to be saved. You do something about it. There's, something has burst inside your stomach. You need to do something. You do that. But with chronic, states, I think Western medicine has very limited scope and it doesn't really have answers. And that's not true just for mental health, it's true for everything across the board. I think if we understand that and we understand the limitations of Western medicine, perhaps we will not go astray, and we need to be better consumers ourselves. We need to be better patients ourselves and ask the right questions and figure out what for us would be the right system of medicine to go to. So that would be my response.
So, I mean, I would like to play the devil's advocate here on behalf of physicians, because I think really what happens is that we are not given that education in medical school, in Western medical school, I should say. But, I grew up in India, but for me, when it was time for me to choose my career path, back in the late 80s, early 90s, when I was in 11th and 12th, it was either engineering or medicine. That was the mindset that was there. But an Ayurveda was not even considered as a valid form of medical science. It was, oh, it's voodoo medicine, it's this. And when I got into NIMHANS, and I know that one of my senior residents, she was actually doing a study comparing amitriptyline, an antidepressant, to Sudarshan Kriya Yoga. And that she was doing that because her professor with whom she was supposed to do her thesis, Dr. Janaki Ramaya, he is not with NIMHANS anymore. He retired back in the early 2000s itself. He was very much, very old school traditional, and he had that basis in, probably traditional medicine, probably coming from his family tradition. And he wanted to do that, but I remember this resident, a very nice person. She was like, oh, this is just bogus. I was like, oh, this is just bogus. It doesn't really, I think that is also a remnant of our colonization by the British. We incorporated a lot of that, and anything that came from the West, we just incorporated. But I agree with you, Aparna, that they don't teach how to treat modern chronic diseases in modern medicine. There is no education on nutrition. There is no education about really what about metabolism. That's what holistic medicine, medical traditions, whether it's Chinese medicine and Ayurveda, they really understand. If somebody is presenting with symptoms, where is the breakdown? Like if you see in in the textbook of pathology, for almost all illnesses, ultimately they'll say it's idiopathic or we don't know, or they'll blame it on the genes. Take autism, for example. I think purely genetic causes for autism is about, I think it's about 5%, let's say even 10% of all patients with autism, you can identify a genetic cause. But all the research is invested in looking at those genes for 5 to 10% of patients with autism. What does that mean? Anywhere from 90 to 95% is caused by the environment. Nobody's looking at that. Cancer, same scenario. Genetic causes of all of these diseases are around 1 to 5%, if I remember correctly. But even at a stretch, it will not be more than 10%. So, but in terms of holding physicians accountable, it has to be by becoming a really good consumer and knowing that you will always have your best interest at heart. And like how Reshma did, find that physician who is willing to listen to you. If they're only about pills, or if they're only about trying to fix your problem for you, that's not the person to work for. And as on the other side, when I made my transition, it was not only was the medical, I was working for a local hospital. I had to leave that job because what I was saying was not at all accepted. But the sad part is it was not even accepted by patients because, again, especially here in the US, every second or third ad is for a medication. And most of those ads are for antidepressants and psychiatric medications. So that is what is being, so yeah, the pharmaceutical industry is not only harping at the doors of physician offices, but they're also in your living rooms talking to you directly about what medications you need to be taking for every condition. And the sad part is, if you listen to that, when it comes to the side effects, they'll speak very fast. And they will, this was actually, we were at some hotel and I was watching some movie with the kids. That's when we get to see ads. Otherwise, we don't see ads. And my kids have not seen ads, but they know my philosophy and everything. And there was an ad for an antidepressant. Ultimately, it's in the side effect thing, they said, the suicidal ideation and death can happen. So that they're saying that, but asking you to go and take that medication. So it's hilarious if you look at it. Yeah, I mean, have a little bit of sympathy even for the physicians that you work with, because the mind sees. So the eye see what the mind knows, and if you're not taught, then you're not going to see that. I was still very early in my career I credit that to becoming a mother and realizing that I wanted to give the best food for my children and learning about environmental toxins, pesticides, and all of that. That's what made me think, oh, if that's what I'm giving my kids, and what is happening with the patients, why are they not getting better? And these medications don't seem to be working. But I was still very early in my career that I was able to make the shift. But if you're working with somebody in their 50s and 60s who believed in one kind of a propaganda, it is a propaganda, and then you tell them, hey, you're wrong, it's going to backfire. So I think we just have to let that breed phase out, but really working with medical schools, working with those new interns and physicians, that's where we need to intervene. So this does require a political will. There's no question about that. So.
Yeah, thank you so much for that answer. If anyone else has no other comments, then I'd like to move on to the next question. Okay, yeah. Before that, just a quick notice. We will be ending the discussion at 8 o'clock. So, just so that this doesn't get in the way of anybody's dinner or, difficult things. So there's another question which I saw at the top, which mixes with something else that I wanted to ask. So are there any differences you see between countries in their handling of mental health crises? Are there any countries that are handling them better? And alongside that, I want to ask, what is the ideal state that we want when it comes to mental health and infrastructure? Like, to each of the panelists, what are your own sort of views of what an ideal mental health infrastructure would be? Let's start with Pankaj.
So I think to answer, just respond to the first question that what country might be doing better in terms of, I don't have a lot of clarity on this, but just to think of, like, I think of Argentina in terms of how there's so much psychotherapy available there, and it's much more open to talk about one's suffering and to be with that. So I think and not such a strong pull by psychiatry to medicate every distress. So this just comes to my mind, but I'm not very sure about it. Maybe others would have more awareness about it. And thinking about the ideal setup for mental health crisis, I think it has to be holistic. So what I think very strongly is that that one needs to address the suffering, the distress at various levels, at a biological level, and also at a psychological level, and also at a social level, and then also at a spiritual level. So I think to have an ideal setup is to have a space for all of this to engage. Like so for example, something which can incorporate all of them. So I certainly feel the psychiatry, the present model that we have, focuses on the the biological level, as if it's in the brain, it's in the, and I think some regards it's true that there's some suffering is coming in our biological as well. Like if we are experiencing some sort of imbalance, but just fixes and not heals. So something like which like functional medicine, like or Ayurveda or nutrition balancing, or some sort of powerful alternative in that sense, right? Which is catering to a biological bodily concern. So I think that's would be one, and then psychological and emotional can also be addressed in a therapeutic setting. So having a psychotherapeutic setting which is not a assistant to psychiatry, focusing on CBT or something which is solution focused, but having a more open space which is like more humanistic and more person centered or more psychodynamic, where person is just can talk about the experiences and heard and engage, and or more like having a sense of Jungian perspective, which is also letting person go through their distress, pain, like going into the swamplands of the person, of the with them, and having a sense of companionship with around it. And I think when I think of social paradigms which can be incorporated, something that comes to my mind like is like again, it's a Western like open dialogue where people come together, sit with their families. So often the crisis, the mental health struggle is rooted from the context. So from the family, from the community that we're living in, like someone will share they feel like an outsider. It's they're echoing something about the context they're living in. And instead of looking at the culture, instead of looking at the community, we're looking if we just locate the a suffering in an individual's brain, then it's very fragmented. And I think that's what the culture of capitalism and sort of commercialization is done, right? And it just looks at one part. So something which is social, like, and it can also be local, like people sitting together and talking about their suffering and having a safe space to talk about in the community. And a race and a competition, if they have places to fall, places to just experience failure and just retreat or fall down and rest, then I think socially these kind of interventions would be sort of ideal. And then certainly at a soul level, at a spiritual level, which is sort of so I've started the ideal from the biological physical level, but it has to be upside down. Like Reshma mentioned in the chat, that we are the spiritual beings and who are experiencing the human condition. Logical and the physical is sort of manifestation, is the is a more tangible manifestation of how we relate to the source of the sense. And so in terms of that, I think Ayurveda, I think, addresses at a deeper level as well. It's not just at a biological, but also at looking at the source. And from there, it's coming to sort of approach would be ideal. I think that takes that kind of route.
Yeah, thank you for your answer. Do any of the other panelists have anything to say along that topic? Yeah, I guess not. So, Devanshu, if you'd like to talk.
Okay, so we're going to wrap up the discussion, and I want to thank the audience for being such active participants, and the moderator, the panelists for taking out time from their busy schedules to conduct this panel discussion with us. And if any of the panelists would like to plug in any work they do, this now's the time to do it.
Yeah, if you guys have any final remarks that you'd like to make before closing out, please feel free.
All right. So,
Oh no, I think
la-
Dr. Tummala wanted to say something.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone for for this invitation. I really enjoyed being here, and I was really very excited to hear about Aparna and Reshma's work already. I mean, I wasn't aware of that. Aparna, if you can tell me about your movie, I would love to. I can actually feature it on my website as well. So because this is a very needed message, not only here in the U.S. but also in India. Um, so that's there is mental illness is curable. We can recover from most mental illnesses, and the best way for that is really prevention. So our focus should be on preventing, but also for people that are struggling with mental illness, we really have to look at the whole mind body spirit axis, the gut brain axis. That's where the answers lie, and it doesn't take long to when people are not exposed to psychiatric medications. Most people experience improvement in symptoms within about 3 to 4 weeks. But I tell everyone that we have to first heal the physical body and then the mental and emotional bodies, and that takes time, because healing the mental and emotional body is really about the relationship to our own self. Are we approaching ourselves with self-love or self-criticality? Once healing the body is very easy, but that self-love and self-worth, that is what takes time, but it can be done. We just have to show the path. It's we so I would actually, from my end, from my side, I would end with that there is a lot of hope, and we all have something to look forward to. Thank you again, and have a great weekend.
all right. So, I would like to mention a couple of things before we wrap up. So, the film, of course, has a presence on also all social media platforms, including Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter. On the film's YouTube channel, you can find about 100 outtakes from the film, in case that is of interest to you. And I will also drop two links. One where you can donate to the cause of the movie, and one where you can find additional resources for further reference. Thank you very much.
Yeah, firstly, I'd like
Thank you
to.
everyone. I just want to again just thank everyone for having this wonderful discussion. And yeah, I mean, I think I echo what Dr. Aruna said. I feel like there's a lot of hope. I mean, the fact that we're all chatting about this, the fact that we're talking, I mean, it's much more than what happened 10 years ago. So, already there, it means that we've progressed. And I think the last thing I'd like to say is that, and it's something that really troubles me, 10 years ago, there was no conversation on mental health. Now we seem to have a lot of conversation, but unfortunately, we don't seem to have the right conversation about mental health. It's almost like we're peddling drugs. And I think that's something we all need to be very careful about. We need to talk about mental health, but also look at it through the right lenses. Otherwise, we'll be adding to, new problems, and we'll be creating a new epidemic. So I think that is something that we need to be really careful about.
Yeah, I just thank you everybody for I think everybody's contribution. I also want to just add to the ideal question of a mental health system. I don't think it should only be mental health related. I think it should be different systems that are held accountable, but also that are also mobilized. It's not only about mental health, it's an entire community that needs to come together, and which means that we need to be working more in communities. We need to be actually just being open to listen to other people. Our lifestyles nowadays don't allow us to listen. We are usually shutting down. Of course, being in front of the computer creates that nowadays. But I think being open to listen to another and actually just being there allows for such spaces. And this can happen outside the clinic. It doesn't need to be inside the clinical space. So creating such spaces itself, I think, can open up an ideal within those spaces that you're located in. So yeah, that's what I'd like to say.
Something that occurred to me while you were talking, Kimberly, is, we're human beings, we're not human doings. Okay to just be, we don't always have to do something. And I think in modern society, we're always so focused on what we're doing, we need to just, cycle back a bit, dial down a little and just be.
Anyway, yeah, this was a really insightful discussion, and I'm really, really thankful for all you guys for, taking time out of your days. And, I think what happened today will really just impact the way we think about our own mental health and just the way we act towards ourselves in the long term as well, whether it's in subtle ways or whether it's, ways that we change our life. And we heard some amazing stories as well. So yeah, thank you guys for coming out, and I'd like to thank the audience for sticking with us so long. Uh, yeah, I think that's it. Nicole, I've given you host control, so yeah. Pankaj, would you like to say something?
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, I just want to say thank you, everyone, for this coming together as well. Like, I mean, I felt like I also feel like this kind of space can add to, creating more spaces in the community where we're talking about it. And, somehow I just feel like seeing Medicating normal is like seeing, a sort of after sort of sequel of Drop of Sunshine, because in some ways, that starts the conversation also about problem with the psychiatry. And I think Medicating normal takes it forward to look at the tapering off process much more intensely. But of course, it touches on several themes. So I think we're moving ahead, I think. So I think I'm thankful for everyone to come and join in here. And yeah, and also Arvind and Devanshu for very, alive, enlivening, moderating. Thank you. Nicole for Medicating normal team to join us.